All right. Thank you, Joe, for being with us today.
Absolutely. Always great to be with you guys.
Joe, nice to see you. Thank you for taking time to join us on Of the People. Haven't seen you since First in the Nation. How are things going?
Well, look, about as well as they were going when I saw you guys in New Hampshire, but perhaps worse.
I was hoping for so much better.
We have we have a busted border deal, which perhaps you should be thanking the good heavens for, because
Right.
there's this narrative being put forth by the Democrats that somehow that Donald Trump has planted worms in the minds of all the Republican voters and legislature, and that is why we have rejected this deal. The fact is, the deal would have been rejected in the ninth hour or the first hour if they told us what was inside the deal. So it's only rejected in the 11th hour because they hid it from us. You cannot solve a crisis by codifying the problems that led to the crisis. And the notion that you can leave 5,000 people a day coming into the country, and only then will the president have the authority to close the border completely as if he doesn't possess that power already. That is not a solution. That is a con. That is business as usual. That is the type of governance that got us in this problem in the first place.
That's right.
You know, that's a good point. So my argument is pretty simple. You know, the Democrat playbook is always to take a issue or a problem, make it bigger, and then try to drive through a compromise that codifies what they really wanted. And this bill, I haven't read it because I don't know that anybody has, right? This is the old Nancy Pelosi playbook of we have to pass the bill before we figure out what's in it, right? Which, and by the way, they're not going to committee on it. They're not going to allow any amendments on it, right? And what they're doing to me is codifying illegality into law. So 5,000 people a day are allowed, as at least from what we know, are allowed to come into this country illegally, and that's okay. And then we're going to enforce the laws after these people come in illegally, right? I mean, it's the Democratic playbook. And to me, this bill, which, look, even Senator Langford is now not even saying he's going to support the bill that he sponsored, right? Which you got to love that. But your old, you ran against Senator Schumer. I want to talk about it in a second. But obviously, it's the Schumer, McConnell, Langford, and I think Sinema are the sponsors of the bill.
Oh, God. So a bunch of basically Democrats.
Pretty much.
Did
And
I say that
basically,
out loud?
they've codified it into law. It's dead on arrival. But isn't that really the Democrat playbook to ensconce or pass open borders? That's what this bill was, isn't it?
Well, there's a lot of things here that are pretty pernicious. First and foremost, Democrats trying to convince us that they actually care about securing the border. Everything that they have done since Joseph Robinette Biden has taken the oath of office has been to allow undocumented illegal immigrants and migrants to have unfettered access to our country. Every single time the state of Texas tries to say we will secure the border on our own since the federal government won't do it, the Biden DOJ has dragged them to court. The state of Arizona famously decided we will put up a temporary barrier using shipping containers to secure the border. The Biden DOJ took them to court. The latest nonsense with the DOJ suing Texas to say that they have the right to cut down the barbed wire that the state of Texas has put up to secure the border. So you can't keep telling people we don't want open borders when anytime somebody tries to secure the border, you go ahead and open it up again or sue for the right to do so. So, stop gaslighting the American people and convincing us that our eyes are lying to us, that the definition of words have suddenly changed overnight. They don't want men or women to mean the same things anymore. They don't want a secure border to have the same definition either. So, yes, it's just par for the course here, and we just have to keep telling people, as President Trump told us when he came down that escalator in 2015, either we have a country or we don't. And that phrase starts with having respect for American sovereignty. They have debased our sovereignty on the southern border. And that's before we get to the gotaways that are escaping detection and getting around the border, the actual border agents. That's before we get to the fentanyl crisis that has turned Main Street USA into a killing field because of parents being forced to bury children that should still be here laughing and living and prospering. They've allowed this Chinese Communist Party to declare pharmaceutical warfare on Main Street. Joe Biden has done nothing. That's why the fentanyl continues to stream unabated over that Mexican border.
And one of the things that I've also heard about the bill is that, by the way, the 5,000 limit is only for a contiguous border to the U.S. So in theory, if we had 20,000 Chinese nationals cross the border, the 5,000 limit doesn't apply. What I'm trying to wrap my head around, though, is the federal government already has the tools to close the border, do they not? There is the Immigration and Nationalization Act, which was already passed. There was Trump's policy Remain in Mexico, both of which functionally were working. And obviously the Trump administration gave some definition to what an asylum seeker was. You had to be persecuted by a government, not by,
Political.
not by your husband or wife, or not by the cartels, right? I mean, Joe, what am I missing here? I mean, enforce the laws, right? If just enforce the laws, we wouldn't have a border problem.
Well, let's just work our way backwards with this failed bill. The failed bill, again, gives the president the right to ask for the border to be sealed completely once this 5,000 a day daily limit has been breached, which begs the question again. If you are now effectively acknowledging what we have told you for months and years, that the president already has this authority, why doesn't he secure and close the border today, being that we're already breaching the threshold that they are proposing under this new law? So it just goes to show you the lack of seriousness in the legislation, that there is no actual integrity in what they are proposing. They don't want the secure border. They want to have the patina of having solved the problem while also reserving the right to allow things to continue as they currently are. Because if the president actually wants us to believe that he has seen the light, and suddenly with this new law passed, that he is going to ask the actual people on the border to secure it, a good show of good faith would be for him to secure the border today, which he hasn't done, because his own party is crying for him not to even sign this bill that he has asked these Democrats to booby trap before it even lands on his desk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I read the progressive lobby says the bill doesn't go far enough and does not provide amnesty for all the illegals who are currently in the country as well.
Yeah.
This is crazy. I mean,
Right.
You have to just break this down and say, look, we are a compassionate nation. I would offer that you can't find a more compassionate nation than the United States of America, no matter how much those activists on the left want to tell you otherwise. But there is nothing compassionate about people trying to go through one of the most dangerous expanses on the planet, the Darien Gap, and having tents set up there for the sole explicit purpose of the sexual assault of women and children who attempt to go through this perilous journey. And then only to be subject again on the border to more sexual assault. We have reports from all manner of organizations across the political spectrum that tell us no less than 70% of the women and children who make this perilous journey are sexually assaulted along the way. And the trophies on the southern border, aka the tattered clothing hanging from the cacti and the trees, which in many ways are the reminder of that assault, is not something that should be happening in the name of America. And it happens because our elected officials have told people that it is their right to come here and enter the country illegally. They, in many ways, are hand delivering these women and children as chattel to the cartels for the money they receive, and also for them to be abused physically, mentally, and emotionally as well.
That's what I mean. All of this just feels so much like dereliction of duty. Like they're creating a humanitarian crisis. If you say, let's just say, yes, we're going to take in all of these asylum seekers. Why wouldn't we then just go get them? Why wouldn't we just go pick them up and be like, hey, just come in this plane, instead of allowing them to be sexually assaulted, possibly die, starve to death, beaten, whatever else it is? Like, there is no logic in any of the decisions that are being made.
Well, because the logic is clear. That they are trying to perpetuate a fraud on the American people. We know already prior to Joe Biden, prior to even President Trump, the vast majority of people that come to this country seeking asylum do not qualify for asylum.
Right.
We go through a deliberate process to give them their just due and give them their day in court. But ultimately, north of 90% of the people that seek asylum do not qualify for asylum under the terms of the laws of this nation. And so the real question has to be asked, if you know this, why do you continue to act as if every single person coming here is a credible asylum seeker? And even take a step beyond that. At what point in time does your credible fear of persecution from wherever you come actually stop kicking in? Right? We've got over 24,000 military aides, mostly men, coming from China. Right? How many countries have they passed through before they arrived at a checkpoint on our southern border? You look at this concretely. Yes, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I'm so incensed. This is the thing. If you're so scared and you're running, why do you have to come to America? If you've left China and you make it to South America, in theory, you're already in a better place than you were before, where you're not going to be persecuted for religion or whatever. So why do you then have to come to America?
Well, look, and I think that this is the question that has to be asked. We have individuals who have gone to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 countries before they've arrived at America to seek asylum. Whatever you think of the laws that we have on the books, I think it is fair to say that, yes, you have the right to seek asylum. You do not have the right to go asylum shopping. And what it's like that they're going to seek asylum in one place. There has to be burden sharing here. If we're going to continue to pump billions of dollars into the UN and to NATO, these other allied nations have to share this burden with us. It's not just the burden of trying to keep this axis of evil that has been reborn under Joe Biden at bay. It is also the burden sharing for what happens when the axis of evil causes disturbances in the actual human dealings of everyday life that results in people being displaced. So how are you going to deal with that displacement? We can and shall have a heart for that, as we always have. But the notion that we are going to say that the only place these people can find asylum is the United States of America makes no sense. And the last thing I will simply say is that if you go back to when George W. Bush was president, when they put in place that Third Safe Country Act, the original Third Safe Country Act, it basically gave Canada the right to say any person that shows up at our border at an actual official point of entry, we reserve the right to send them back to one of the first countries they passed through before they got here. So the United States of America signed an agreement with Canada, giving Canada the right to turn people away who had gone through multiple countries before they got to Canada. Then the Biden administration, during this reboot of Obama 2.0, whatever you want to call it, went back and codified that agreement and expanded it to not just the official points of entry, but all the points in between the official points of entry, which is where the majority of the illegal immigration had been happening. So the question becomes, if you somehow recognize that there are people seeking asylum in countries that arguably had better claims in one of the earlier countries they visited, you as America give that right to our neighbor on the northern border, which effectively borders nobody but us. Why in the world do we not ask the same of other countries, including Mexico, including all the allied countries that these migrants are passing through on the road to the American dream that they are trying to take through means that go outside the bounds of our laws, because once again, the people in D.C. declared the southern border the new El Asylum.
That's right. That is right.
Good point. So, Joe, I wanted you to wade in something a little more controversial. We were also talking about Texas in particular, and the increase in Texas movement to secede from the United States and the legality or illegality of that. I'm not arguing they should, and I'm not arguing they will. But certainly this whole border crisis and the pending crisis between what I would argue is states' rights, Texas, 10th Amendment to the Bill of Rights, I think it's Section 10 of Article 1 as well of the U.S. Constitution. And obviously, Ambassador Haley sort of waded into this controversy by first saying Texas had the right and didn't have the right. Where does the Constitution give the right to secede, in your opinion?
I mean, I think there's two conversations here. There's what we call the letter of the law, and then there's also what we call the spirit of the law. Certainly, all you have to do is read the writings of Jefferson, read the writings of many of the founding fathers. It was quite clear that they understood that this was a government that could only exist by the consent of the governed. This was a government that they believed only had the legitimacy that we describe as America if the people of America believed in its legitimacy. So America has always been an idea. I think the founders always recognized that the thing that held that idea together was the freedom of the people to discard that idea when they felt as if the governance of the idea had been betrayed. So I think that certainly there are people who are more well-versed in the legal arguments, but I think that anyone who has read any of the text of the Constitution or the supporting text, the Federalist documents, all the things that people were talking about when they were trying to strike that balance between states' rights and federal rights, understood implicitly that the people had the right to disband the government they thought was unjust, that they thought was engaged in tyranny. Having said that, I do not believe that it would behoove those of us who believe that the government is going off the rails, who believe that we are seeing the slow creeping, now accelerating tyranny of one-party rule creep into our local communities, creep into the halls of power down in D.C., you think that the best answer is to turn and run. I'm reminded of those words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., since it is Black History Month, when A. Philip Randolph or Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. sat down and he says, "I feel I have integrated my people into a burning house." And the response was that we must be firemen, that we must go into the flames, that we must put out the flames. And if we truly believe in our hearts that America remains the greatest force for freedom and justice on the planet, that we remain that beacon of hope that is required for the world as we know it to persevere, for freedom to persevere, then we have an obligation morally, spiritually, and certainly to honor what Abraham Lincoln called the last full measure of devotion, those Americans who have donned the uniform of this nation to secure freedom here at home and abroad, to fight like heck to preserve this union, as Abraham Lincoln gave his life to do so as well.
I like that answer, and it's very thoughtful to me. My issue, and again, I don't want to see the dissolution of this country. I think part of the problem is we focus on what divides us. With intent, we're being forced to focus on what divides us as a country, not what unites us as a country. Men from women, black from white, rich from poor. I mean, I think there is a deliberate attempt to keep us divided because it's much easier to sort of rule if you're in the minority, if your opposition is divided. The world according to me. My concern is we have selective application of the law. Before we are a democracy, and we're not really a democracy, Joe, you know that. We're really a constitutional republic, right? We are a nation of laws. And the last line of defense is always the rule of law. And if you want to radically transform society, which is what I would argue is really going on here, is an attempt to make America into something different. I don't know what that different is, but we can have that discussion. Is you go after the laws, right? And then you go after the people who enforce the laws, right? So I think for me, my issue is there is selective application of the laws. Let's look at what the Biden administration did when the Supreme Court came down and ruled that they could not waive student debt. What did they do? They functionally ignored the law, right? We're only going to the sanctuary cities, which are illegal based on law, but we're only going to apply the laws that we like, and we're not going to apply the laws that we don't like. The minute you get into selective application of the laws on either side, I would argue tends to denigrate, and we devolve into something other than the freedom and the principles upon which this country was founded.
Yeah, isn't that like banana republic status?
Well, look, I would agree, and I would say this: I have compared what is happening in America right now to what happens all the time on Wall Street, kind of this reverse merger, hostile takeover raider approach to governance, right? U.S. Airways and American Airlines merges. U.S. Airways is the functional airline that actually isn't going bankrupt, and yet they adopted the business practices of American Airlines, which was functionally bankrupt and didn't work. And they keep the name. So the name remains the same, but obviously if you were a U.S. Airways customer, certainly you woke up in a different universe. And I think many Americans feel like they're waking up in a different universe. People effectively trying to keep the moniker that is America, but trying to take America and morph it into something it was never intended to be by embracing policies like socialism that have never worked in the history of the world. So yes, I think the last line of defense is the rule of law. We have to be a nation that has people who are, again, we have a nation that works, a republic that works by consent of the governed. That consent cannot be granted if the people have taken the rule of law that separates us from the hordes and tossed it into the trash. But I also would say that that's why elections matter. That is why integrity of our elections matter, because the remedy to those who try to, in many ways, infiltrate those corridors where the law exists is to have elections that allow us to take back control of the tools that we leverage in order to have justice and domestic tranquility, as the Constitution calls for. So, yes, I think it is a delicate balance. I think perhaps the looming threat of the dissolution of our union, if we continue to go down this path, in many ways is the greatest stick to go along with the carrot of hope that we can be using to make sure that we get back to a place where the founding ethos of this nation can once again reign supreme.
I love it. What I hear you guys talking about is defending American values, American institutions, and American freedom.